For just $50, what you can toss into your grocery cart varies wildly depending on where you live. In 2025, that same $50 could mean a cart brimming with essentials in one country, or barely a few items in another. The global disparity in food prices is staggering, and it's reshaping how families shop and survive. In this video, we're diving into the reality of what $50 can actually buy at supermarkets around the world. From aisles where it's enough to stock up for the week to places where it barely covers the basics, the contrast is eye-opening. You'll see how inflation and shifting food systems are impacting your wallet and why $50 doesn't stretch as far as it used to. Stick around as we explore 20 grocery items you can snag for $50 no matter where you shop. 1. The pricey evolution of olive oil. Olive oil, once a staple in kitchens worldwide, has become a symbol of how inflation has reshaped grocery budgets in 2025. In Mediterranean countries like Spain, Italy, and Greece, where olive oil has been a cultural and culinary cornerstone for centuries, the impact of climate change has been devastating. Droughts and poor harvests have driven prices sky high, turning what was once an everyday cooking essential into a luxury item. A single bottle can now consume a significant chunk of a $50 grocery budget, leaving little room for other necessities. In regions outside the Mediterranean, where olive oil was already considered a premium product, the situation is even more dire. Many families have been forced to switch to cheaper alternatives like sunflower or canola oil, which lack the same health benefits. Olive oil, rich in antioxidants and healthy fats, has long been celebrated for its role in promoting heart health and overall wellness. However, its rising cost has made it inaccessible to many, pushing them toward less nutritious options. The disparity is stark. In some parts of the world, $50 might have once bought multiple bottles of olive oil, but today it barely covers one. This shift highlights the growing inequality in access to healthy food options. Olive oil's transformation from a pantry staple to a budget-busting luxury is a clear example of how inflation and environmental challenges are reshaping global food systems. 2. Bottled water, a costly necessity. Bottled water, a product that should symbolize abundance and accessibility, has become a glaring example of global inequality in 2025. In wealthier nations, a $50 budget might still cover several cases of bottled water, leaving room for other groceries. However, in less developed regions, where clean tap water is often unavailable or unsafe, bottled water is not a choice but a necessity. Here, the same $50 might barely secure a few bottles, forcing families to make difficult trade-offs between water and food. The rising cost of bottled water can be attributed to several factors, including increased transportation expenses, plastic shortages, and stricter environmental regulations. What was once one of the cheapest and most readily available items on store shelves has now become a symbol of the growing divide between those who can afford basic necessities and those who cannot. For families in regions where bottled water is essential for survival, the financial burden is immense. A significant portion of their grocery budget is consumed by water, leaving little left for other essentials. Meanwhile, in wealthier countries, bottled water remains an afterthought, a convenience rather than a lifeline. This stark contrast underscores the painful irony of bottled water in 2020. It is the most basic resource on Earth, yet its cost and availability vary dramatically depending on where you live. The global disparity in access to clean water is a sobering reminder of the inequalities that persist in our world. 3. Rice, the fragile foundation of global diet. Rice, a dietary cornerstone for billions of people across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, reveals just how unevenly $50 stretches in today's grocery stores. In countries like India, Vietnam, and Thailand, where rice is a major agricultural product, $50 can still secure a substantial supply, enough to feed a family for weeks. However, in regions that rely on imported rice, the same amount might only cover a few small bags. Export restrictions, rising global demand, and climate-related challenges have all contributed to soaring prices, making rice less accessible to those who need it most. For many families, rice is more than just a source of calories. It represents tradition, stability, and survival. In the past, bulk purchases of rice were a reliable way to ensure food security for an entire month. But in 2025, those same bulk purchases are becoming increasingly out of reach. The affordability of rice has always been a marker of economic stability, and its rising cost is a troubling sign of the fragility of the global food system. In some parts of the world, $50 still buys enough rice to fill a shopping cart, symbolizing abundance and resilience. In others, it barely scratches the surface of what families need to get by. This stark contrast highlights the growing inequality in access to basic staples and serves as a reminder of how interconnected and vulnerable our food systems have become. 4. Oats. The rising cost of a humble breakfast. Oats, once celebrated as an affordable and nutritious breakfast option, have become another casualty of rising food prices in 2025. In countries where oats are grown locally, families can still purchase them at relatively reasonable prices. However, in regions that rely on imports, the cost of oats has surged, making them surprisingly expensive for a product that was once considered a budget-friendly staple. The growing popularity of oats as a global superfood has also contributed to their rising cost. Health-conscious consumers around the world have driven up demand, while production challenges in key growing regions have further strained supply. As a result, a $50 grocery budget might cover a large supply of oats in one country, but only a few small packets in another. For families that once relied on oats as a cheap and filling option for breakfast or baking, the rising cost is a significant burden. Alternatives like sugary cereals are often even more expensive, while bread and pastries lack the same nutritional value. Oats have long been a symbol of healthy eating on a budget, but in 2025, they are increasingly out of reach for many. The uneven pricing of oats around the world is a stark reminder of how inflation and global demand can transform even the most humble foods into luxury items. Whether $50 buys a pantry full of oats or just a handful of packets depends entirely on where you live, highlighting the growing disparities in access to affordable, nutritious food. 5. The surprising cost of sugar and salt. Sugar and salt, the most basic seasonings found in nearly every kitchen, have become unexpected indicators of global inequality in 2025. In some regions, these items remain affordable enough that a portion of a $50 grocery budget can stock a household for months. But in others, rising production costs, supply chain disruptions, and taxes on processed goods have turned them into surprisingly expensive purchases. The global sugar market has been hit hard by poor harvests in major producing countries like Brazil and India. Meanwhile, the cost of salt has risen due to increased mining expenses, higher energy demands, and transportation challenges. These factors have made sugar and salt far more expensive than most people would expect, especially in regions with struggling economies. For families in wealthier nations, $50 can still buy plenty of sugar and salt, leaving room for other groceries. But for those in less developed regions, these two basic seasonings can consume a significant portion of their budget, leaving little left for other essentials. The symbolism is striking. Sugar and salt were once among the cheapest and most abundant items on Earth, universally available to everyone. Today, they serve as a reminder that no item in the grocery store is immune to inflation. The cost of sugar and salt in 2025 depends entirely on where you live, and the gap between abundance and scarcity is growing wider every day. These once humble ingredients have become yet another example of how global food systems are failing to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. 6. The rising cost of energy bars. Energy bars, once a convenient and affordable snack, have become a striking example of how inflation has reshaped grocery budgets in 2025. In wealthier nations, $50 might only buy a small handful of high-quality branded energy bars, barely enough to last a week. Meanwhile, in less affluent regions, energy bars are often viewed as luxury imports, with $50 unable to cover even a modest box. This disparity highlights how even the simplest snacks have become markers of economic inequality. The rising cost of energy bars is tied to the ingredients that make them nutritious and appealing. Staples like oats, nuts, dried fruits, and chocolate have all seen significant price increases due to global shortages and high demand. Add in the costs of marketing, packaging, and transportation, and these once affordable snacks now take up a larger portion of household grocery budgets. For families who relied on energy bars as a quick, healthy option, the price hike has made them increasingly out of reach. The alternatives to energy bars are often less nutritious. Cheaper processed snacks may save money, but they come with a trade-off: more sugar, fewer nutrients, and empty calories. This shift from healthy to unhealthy options is not just an economic downgrade, but a nutritional one, with long-term consequences for families on tight budgets. In 2025, whether $50 buys you a decent stock of energy bars or just a few single packs depends entirely on where you live. Regardless of location, the rising cost of this once simple snack is a painful reminder of how inflation is reshaping even the smallest aspects of our diets. 7. Instant coffee, a morning ritual under threat. Instant coffee, long celebrated as the most affordable way to enjoy caffeine at home, has become another product that exposes the uneven impact of inflation. In coffee-producing countries like Brazil or Colombia, $50 can still buy a substantial supply of instant coffee, enough to last for months. However, in regions that rely on imports, the same $50 might only secure a few jars, leaving coffee lovers scrambling to adjust their budgets. The rising cost of instant coffee is driven by a combination of factors including climate change, poor harvests, and surging global demand. Coffee prices have climbed steadily, making even this budget-friendly option more expensive than many shoppers anticipated. For millions of people, coffee is more than just a drink. It's a daily ritual, a source of comfort, and an essential part of starting the day. Instant coffee has historically been the go-to choice for families and workers looking to enjoy their morning brew without breaking the bank. But in 2025, even this humble product has become a strain on grocery budget. Alternatives like tea are also becoming pricier, while energy drinks are both costly and unhealthy, leaving few affordable options for caffeine lovers. The loss of cheap coffee is deeply cultural, affecting not just wallets but also daily routine. Depending on where you live, $50 might barely keep this ritual alive, or price it out entirely, highlighting the growing inequality in access to even the simplest comforts. 8. Cereals, the shrinking breakfast staple. Cereals, once the epitome of affordable family-friendly breakfasts, now reveal just how far $50 can or can't go in 2020. But in regions where cereals are imported and heavily branded, $50 may only cover a small selection of brightly packaged boxes, often consumed within just a few days. The price surge in cereals is driven by multiple factors. Rising grain costs, sugar inflation, expensive packaging, and aggressive marketing have all contributed to making cereals less accessible. What was once a symbol of cheap convenience, especially for families with children, has now become a luxury for many households. Parents are increasingly forced to cut back on cereals, a product that used to be a daily tradition. The alternatives, such as pastries, bread, or processed breakfast foods, are often no better in terms of cost or nutrition. Cereals once occupied a unique middle ground, quick, affordable, and fortified with essential vitamins and minerals. In 2025, however, they have become another example of how inflation is eroding the purchasing power of $50. The shrinking affordability of cereals is a stark reminder of how even the most basic grocery items are no longer immune to economic pressures. Whether $50 buys you a pantry full of cereal or just a few boxes depends entirely on where you shop, underscoring the growing disparities in global food access. 9. Chocolate, a luxury in disguise. Chocolate, a beloved treat around the world, has become one of the clearest examples of inequality in 2025. In cocoa-producing regions like West Africa, $50 can still stretch far, providing multiple bars or bags of chocolate products. However, in countries where cocoa must be imported, such as those in Europe, North America, or Asia, $50 barely covers a handful of items. The global chocolate market has been hit hard by cocoa shortages, inflation, and rising production costs. These factors have turned chocolate into one of the most expensive everyday luxuries. For many families, chocolate is more than just a snack. It's a part of celebrations, holidays, and cherished traditions. But as prices climb, what was once a regular indulgence has become a rare treat. In wealthier nations, $50 might still buy some chocolate, but it's far less than what was possible just a few years ago. In struggling economies, chocolate has all but disappeared from shopping carts, becoming a symbol of privilege rather than a common delight. Substitutes like artificial candies may be cheaper, but they lack the richness, taste, and cultural significance of real chocolate. Whether $50 buys you a modest stockpile or just a single bar, the reality is the same. Chocolate has become one of the most budget-draining items on the shelf. Its rising cost is a bittersweet reminder of how inflation is reshaping even the smallest joys in life. 10. Canned goods, the erosion of a budget staple. Canned goods, long considered the ultimate budget-friendly food, now illustrate just how differently $50 works around the globe. In some regions, $50 can still fill a shopping cart with canned vegetables, soups, beans, or fish, enough to last a family for weeks. But in other countries, rising costs of metal for cans, higher energy prices, and expensive shipping mean $50 buys only a fraction of what it once did. The importance of canned goods cannot be overstated. They have always been a safety net in times of crisis. Cheap, long-lasting, and dependable. Families have relied on them to stretch their budgets, stock up for emergencies, or simply ensure they have food on hand. But in 2025, even this staple is becoming less accessible. Fresh alternatives are not a viable solution for many. Vegetables, meats, and fish are often even more expensive and spoil quickly, making canned goods the last line of defense against hunger. The fact that $50 now buys so much less in canned goods is a troubling sign of how fragile global food security has become. What $50 can get you in canned goods depends entirely on geography. In some places, it still represents abundance and stability. In others, it highlights the growing gap between those who can afford to stock their pantries and those who cannot. Canned goods, once a symbol of resilience, now serve as a stark reminder of the inequalities shaping our world. 11. The shrinking affordability of canned fish. Canned fish, once the go-to option for affordable seafood, has become a glaring example of how inflation is reshaping grocery budgets in 2025. In coastal regions with thriving fishing industries, $50 might still buy a reasonable supply of tuna, sardines, or mackerel, enough to last a family for weeks. However, in landlocked countries or areas heavily reliant on imports, $50 barely stretches to cover a few cans. Rising fuel costs for fishing vessels, stricter environmental policies, and surging global demand have all contributed to the skyrocketing prices of this once affordable staple. For decades, canned fish was celebrated as a practical and protein-rich alternative to fresh seafood or meat. It was long-lasting, convenient, and packed with essential nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids and vitamins. Families could stockpile it without worrying about spoilage or breaking the bank. But in 2025, even this reliable pantry item has become a financial burden for many households. The alternatives to canned fish are not much better. Fresh fish is often prohibitively expensive, and plant-based protein options, while gaining popularity, are still out of reach for many due to their high cost. This leaves families with fewer affordable sources of protein, forcing them to make difficult choices about their diets. In some parts of the world, $50 can still buy a decent stock of canned fish, symbolizing abundance and resilience. But in others, it barely provides a taste of what was once a household staple. The rising cost of canned fish is a stark reminder of how inflation is eroding access to even the most basic and essential foods. 12. The erosion of canned beans as a budget staple. Canned beans, long regarded as the ultimate symbol of affordable and practical food, are now showing the cracks in global food affordability. In some countries, $50 can still buy cases of canned beans, enough to provide weeks of hearty meals. But in regions where production and transportation costs are higher, $50 might only cover a small handful of cans, leaving families struggling to stretch their budgets. The rising cost of canned beans is driven by several factors, including inflation in raw bean prices, the increasing cost of metal for cans, and the energy-intensive processes required for production. These factors have stripped away the affordability of what was once a dependable and nutritious food option. Canned beans are more than just a budget-friendly choice, they are a nutritional powerhouse. Packed with protein, fiber, and essential nutrients, they have been a cornerstone of affordable meals for generations. Families have relied on them to create soups, stews, and side dishes that are both filling and healthy. But in 2025, even this reliable staple is becoming less accessible, forcing many households to reconsider their meal plans. While dry beans may offer more value per pound, they require time and resources for soaking and cooking, luxuries that many struggling families simply don't have. Canned beans were the shortcut to survival, providing a quick and easy way to prepare nutritious meals. Now, whether $50 buys abundance or scarcity depends on geography, but the global trend is clear. The safety net that canned beans once provided is unraveling. Nuts. From everyday snack to luxury item. Nuts, once a reasonably priced and widely accessible snack, have become one of the clearest examples of food inequality in regions like the Middle East or South Asia, where nuts are locally produced. $50 might still buy a fair supply of almonds, pistachios, or cashews. However, in North America or Europe, where nuts are often imported, $50 barely covers a few small bags, making them a luxury item for many households. The rising cost of nuts is driven by a combination of factors, including climate change, water shortages, and the high cost of global shipping. These challenges have made nuts some of the priciest items on grocery store shelves. Despite their nutritional value, nuts are more than just a snack, they are nutritional powerhouses, rich in protein, fiber, and healthy fats. They have long been praised for their role in promoting heart health and overall wellness. However, their rising cost means that many families are cutting them out of their diets entirely. This loss is not just about flavor, it's about losing access to one of the best natural tools for maintaining health. Cheaper snack alternatives, like processed chips or candy, may save money in the short term, but they lack the nutritional benefits that nuts provide. In 2025, $50 might still buy nuts in bulk in producing countries, but elsewhere, it barely covers a small portion. Nuts, once an everyday food, have become a symbol of how far your money doesn't go anymore. 14. Cookies. A treat slipping out of reach. Cookies, a simple treat tied to childhood memories and family traditions, are another food that exposes the reality of $50 grocery budgets in 2025. In some countries, $50 can still cover multiple packages of cookies, making them an affordable indulgence. But in others, rising costs of wheat, sugar, and butter mean that $50 disappears quickly, leaving shoppers with only a small number of boxes. The idea of cookies as a cheap and accessible snack is quickly becoming outdated. The cultural significance of cookies is hard to ignore. They are more than just sweets. Cookies are tied to birthdays, holidays, and moments of comfort shared with loved ones. Their rising cost means that fewer families can afford to include them in their grocery carts, turning what was once a universal treat into a selective privilege. Substitutes for cookies, such as ultra-processed snacks, may be cheaper, but they sacrifice quality, authenticity, and health. Cookies have always represented a balance of indulgence and tradition, but in 2025 they are becoming another item that forces families to make tough choices. Whether to indulge in a small moment of joy or save money for essentials is a decision many households now face. In 2025, whether $50 buys you an abundance of cookies or just a fraction depends on where you live. The trend, however, is the same. The sweetness of this simple treat is slipping away, leaving families with fewer opportunities to enjoy the small comforts of life. 15. Wheat flour, the foundation of global diets. Wheat flour, the backbone of countless cuisines around the world, has become a striking example of how differently $50 stretches in 2020. In wheat-producing countries, $50 can still secure large sacks of flour, enough to make bread, pasta, and baked goods for weeks. But in nations that rely heavily on imports, $50 might barely cover a fraction of that, leaving families with less of the food they depend on most. The rising cost of wheat flour is driven by several factors, including increasing fertilizer prices, poor harvests, and global instability. These challenges have pushed flour prices higher year after year, making it harder for families to afford this essential ingredient. Wheat flour is more than just a staple, it is the foundation of global cuisine. From bread in Europe to naan in South Asia and tortillas in Latin America, wheat flour connects cultures and sustains billions of people. Its rising price has forced bakeries and households alike to raise costs or cut production, leaving families with fewer affordable options for their daily meals. The ripple effect of rising flour prices is massive. When the cost of wheat flour climbs, the prices of everything made with it, bread, pasta, noodles, pastries, and even processed snacks, also increase. For many families, $50 no longer fills a pantry with flour and baked goods. Instead, it barely makes a dent, highlighting the growing challenges of maintaining a balanced diet on a tight budget. In 2025, wheat flour is no longer just a cheap and dependable base for meals. It has become a reminder that even the most fundamental foods are draining wallets, leaving families to grapple with the harsh realities of inflation and food insecurity. The vanishing affordable protein. Eggs, once hailed as the most affordable and versatile source of protein, are no longer the budget-friendly staple they used to be. In many parts of the world, $50 could previously buy several trays of eggs, enough to sustain a family for weeks. However, in 2025, the story is very different. Rising feed costs, frequent outbreaks of avian flu, and soaring energy prices have driven egg prices to unprecedented levels. What was once considered the poor man's meat is now becoming a financial strain for households everywhere. Eggs are more than just a breakfast item. They are a cornerstone of countless recipes, from baked goods to savory dishes. Their nutritional value is unmatched, offering a rich source of protein, vitamins, and essential minerals. For families, eggs have always been a reliable fallback, ensuring there was something nutritious and filling on the table. But as prices climb, this once dependable staple is slipping out of reach for many. Alternatives to eggs, such as plant-based substitutes, are often far more expensive, while meat and fish are already unaffordable for many households. This leaves families with fewer options to maintain a balanced diet. In 2025, whether $50 buys multiple cartons of eggs or just a few dozen depends entirely on where you live. One thing is clear: even this once reliable source of affordable nutrition is no longer immune to the pressures of inflation. 17. Powdered milk. The fading lifeline. Powdered milk, long considered a budget-friendly alternative to fresh dairy, has become another casualty of rising food costs in 2025. In the past, $50 could stock a pantry with enough powdered milk to last for weeks or even months. Today, however, that same $50 barely buys enough to get by. The soaring costs of dairy production, packaging, and global demand have turned this once affordable staple into a strain on family budgets. For families with children, the rising cost of powdered milk is particularly painful. In regions without reliable refrigeration or access to fresh milk, powdered milk has been a lifeline, providing essential nutrients like calcium, protein, and vitamins critical for growth and development. It has long been a safety net for households, ensuring that children receive the nutrition they need. But in 2025, even this safety net is slipping away. Alternatives offer little relief. Fresh milk has also seen sharp price increases, and plant-based options like almond or soy milk are even more expensive. This leaves families with fewer and fewer options to secure basic nutrition. Powdered milk, once a symbol of convenience and affordability, now highlights the harsh realities of inflation. Whether $50 buys a pantry full or just a few small bags depends on where you shop, but the trend is the same. Even the simplest solutions are becoming unaffordable. 18. Dried legumes, the fragile foundation of diets. Dried legumes, beans, lentils, and chickpeas have historically been the backbone of affordable nutrition for low-income families. A $50 grocery trip once secured bulk sacks of these staples, enough to feed households for months. But in 2025, the story has changed. Climate shocks, fertilizer shortages, and disruptions in global trade have caused prices to rise steeply. Now, that same $50 buys far less, turning one of the most reliable and nutritious staples into another source of financial stress. The role of dried legumes in global diets cannot be overstated. They are the foundation of countless traditional meals, from lentil stews to chickpea curries and bean soups. Packed with protein, fiber, and essential vitamins, legumes have long been a cost-effective alternative to meat. For billions of people, they are not just food, they are survival. As prices rise, families are forced to cut back, leading to less nutritious diets and growing food insecurity. Canned legumes might seem like an alternative, but they are even more expensive, while fresh beans are often unavailable or impractical. Dried legumes, once a symbol of abundance for the poor, are now a reminder of how fragile food security has become. In 2025, $50 no longer guarantees a pantry full of legumes, leaving families to grapple with the harsh realities of inflation. 19. Peanut butter. The costly comfort food. Peanut butter, once a cheap and reliable source of protein and energy, has become another drain on grocery budgets in 2025. In the past, $50 could stock up on enough jars to last for weeks, making it a staple in school lunches and quick meals. Today, however, with peanut prices soaring and production costs climbing, that same $50 might only cover a small supply. The cultural significance of peanut butter makes its rising cost even more striking. It's more than just food. It's a staple tied to childhood memories, convenience, and nutrition. For decades, peanut butter was celebrated as one of the most affordable sources of protein, packed with healthy fats and energy. Losing access to it means families are losing both tradition and nutrition. Alternatives like almond or cashew butter are even more expensive, while cheaper spreads are often filled with sugar and additives, offering little nutritional value. This leaves families with a tough choice: pay more for real peanut butter or settle for less nutritious options. In 2025, whether $50 buys a pantry full of peanut butter or just a few jars depends on where you shop. The reality is that peanut butter is no longer the humble budget-friendly staple it once was. 20 Jam, the sweetness that's slipping away. Jam, the colorful spread that once brightened breakfast tables, has become an unexpected financial burden in 2020. In the past, $50 could easily fill a pantry with jars of various flavors, making jam an affordable treat for families. But today, with fruit prices climbing, sugar costs rising, and glass packaging becoming more expensive, that same $50 buys far fewer jars. For many families, jam is more than just a spread, it's a tradition. It's tied to childhood breakfasts, family gatherings, and moments of comfort shared across generations. The rising cost of jam means that fewer families can afford to include it in their grocery carts, turning what was once a simple pleasure into a luxury. The alternatives to jam, such as ultra-processed spreads, may be cheaper, but they lack the authenticity and quality of real fruit preserves. Jam has always represented a balance of sweetness and tradition, but in 2025, it is becoming another item that forces families to make tough choices. Whether $50 buys a variety of flavors or just a single jar depends on where you live, but the trend is clear. The sweetness of this simple treat is slipping away, leaving families with fewer opportunities to enjoy life's small comforts.